was good. This meeting will come to order. This is the meeting of the Bloomington, Monroe County Metropolitan Planning
Recording in
Organization
progress.
Policy Committee for September 9th, 2022. Let's first have introductions of every member who is present. I will start with those who are here on Zoom. We'll start with Ms. Ridge.
Hi, Lisa Ridge,
And you represent?
Monroe County.
Okay, can everybody hear her okay? Can we have her volume up a little bit? Next, Mr. Wallman.
Hello, Chris Wallman with NDOT.
Okay, yeah, the sound's a little low on the Zoom. Next, Ms. Clements.
Margaret Clements, President of the Monroe County Plan Commission.
You are coming through loud and clear. Anybody else on
Thank
Zoom? Okay, if not, we'll start on my left with Commissioner Githens.
Hi, I'm Penny Githens. I'm proxy for Commissioner Julie Thomas.
I'm Pamela Sample, Ellisville Town Council and also Ellisville Planning Commission.
Steve Olin with the Bloomington City Council.
Andrew Seabour, serving as proxy for Mayor Hamilton.
Doug Horn, with Bloomington Public Transit Corporation Board of Directors.
Kate Welts, Monroe County Council.
Nate Nichols, City of Bloomington Public Works Department, and serving as a proxy for Director Adam Wason.
Jason Bannock, Indiana University.
And we have a new arrival.
Sarah Reiterman, Citizens Advisory Committee.
Okay, we have a quorum. Here is a rundown of the agenda for today. We will have approval of minutes for August 12th of this year, communications from the chair, reports from officers and/or committees, the Technical Advisory Committee and the Citizens Advisory Committee. We'll have reports from the MPO staff. We'll have old business, including the fiscal year 2022-2026 TIP amendments for rural transit, Monroe County and the City of Bloomington. New business will include Bloomington Transit's Alternative Fuels and Infrastructure Assessment Study and Go Bloomington Transportation Demand Management. We will then go to public comment on matters not included on the agenda, communications from committee members on matters not included on the agenda, including communications for the State Road 45 corridor and topics for future agendas. Then we will run down our schedule for upcoming meetings before we adjourn. Let's start with approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. We have to have a roll call vote because there are members present online. Can we have a roll call?
I'd like to, is there any discussion?
Certainly, yeah.
Under old business, could we add an item, please, to talk about what's going on with State Route 45 East 10th Street?
That's already under communications from committee members in item 10A.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other additions or subtractions to the agenda? Seeing none, if we could have a roll call. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Clements, please go ahead.
I just object to the item of State Road 45, 46, and 10th Street corridor not being officially on the agenda and being relegated just to communications to items not on the agenda. Several years now, we've been trying to get it on the agenda, and I think there are important things that we need to be briefed on by staff regarding this important corridor. There's been a lot of communication, a lot of work that's been done on this, and we're left unbriefed. Thank you.
Okay, so with respect to that, is it a voting item? Is it something you want to vote on? That's why it would go under. Okay, what would be the thing being voted on?
We'd like to be briefed by staff about the status and the updates on the State Road 45, 46, 10th Street corridor, Pete Ellis Drive, et cetera, that we've been inquiring about for several years, including the diagram that was provided by NDOT to Mr. Ferris and provided to members of the committee that we've been asking for.
Okay.
And it seems staff has it, so we'd like to be briefed.
Thank you. Ms. Reiterman.
It sounds like that would be an item that would be in staff reports and not an item in old business per se. And I'm sure that staff would be happy to report as best they can and perhaps move State Route 45 into their staff report rather than at the end. But I don't know that it needs to go into old business.
I mean, I'm assuming that old business all involves items that need to be voted on. Mr. Martin?
Well, this is an NDOT project, and staff doesn't have the knowledge of the NDOT project because we have several dozen NDOT projects, and we're not able to keep up with all of that. And we have an NDOT representative on the committee, Chris Wallman, representing the district, Seymour District, and he can report on all of that in terms of the timeline and in terms of an upcoming public hearing.
Ms. Clements, Mr. Wallman is here, and he can address your concerns, since he's a member of this body. Does that satisfy your concern, if he were to address it today?
I would like to have Mr. Wallman brief us, but at the same time, I find that staff not responding to requests by the MPO committee members is, and to not have arranged for this briefing, no matter whether it's NDOT or Mr. Martin or Ms. Rosenbarger or someone else, that they have not provided despite our numerous and repeated requests for it to be entered onto the agenda, that they have not arranged for that. So whoever it is who briefs us and not on an item on the agenda that is purposely low priority, for instance, communications on items not on the agenda, would be preferential to what it's currently being turfed as. Thank you.
Is there, Ms. Ryderbrand?
Well, Mr. Chair, I don't understand. This is on the agenda. An update on State Route 45 is clearly on the agenda. Where it's placed on the agenda seems rather irrelevant to this discussion. So the fact that we have it on the agenda already, if there is going to be needing further explication, then it can go on another agenda in the future. To spend our time arguing about the agenda seems totally pointless and a waste of our time.
I would also note that the communications received, I certainly saw the emails from Ms. Clements and from Mr. What's his name?
Ferris.
Mr. Ferris. But they arrived after, the date of this, of the packet was a week ago, and there was a lot in the email to parse. So what I would suggest to Ms. Clements is if you'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda, to move that item to a different part of the agenda, that we should entertain that as an amendment to the agenda. Would you like to make a motion?
Yes, I would like to move the discussion of the State Road 4546 Pete Ellis Drive discussion to old business, a discussion of old business on today's agenda.
Okay, so just to be clear, that would be moving item 10A1 to item 7B. Is there a second for that motion?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on the motion to amend the agenda? To my right? To my left? All right, can we please have a roll call vote on the amendment to move item 10A1, State Road 45 corridor discussion, to item 7B? Mr. Clemens?
Bannock. Sure. Nickel. No. Wiltz.
Yes.
Horn.
Yes.
Seaborn.
No.
Volan.
No.
Samples.
No.
Ryderband.
No.
Kinsey,
Abstain.
Githens,
Yes?
Ridge,
Yes.
Wallman,
No.
Clements.
Yes.
We have 6-6-1.
Okay, that amendment does not pass. We now go to, I'll entertain other amendments to the agenda, or we'll just move to a roll call vote on the agenda as presented. Are there any other comments on the agenda? Mr. Horn.
I just wanted to make a comment. While I understand Ms. Reideman's concern, I think her chastisement is out of order. Thank you.
Any other discussion on the agenda? If not, let's have a roll call vote on the agenda as presented. Mr. Clemens?
Sorry. Nickel,
Yes.
Wiltz,
Yes.
Horn,
Yes.
Seaboard,
Yes.
Volan,
Yes.
Samples,
Yes.
Ryderband,
Yes.
Kinsey,
Yes.
Githens,
Yes?
Ridge,
Yes.
Wallman,
Yes.
Clements,
No.
Bannock.
The agenda is approved. We now move to approval of minutes for the August 12th, 2022 meeting. Are there, I think we need to introduce it. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Second.
Who made the motion?
Oh, I thought you made the motion.
I'll
Sorry.
make
No,
the
no.
motion to approve the minutes for August 12th, 2022.
And I'll second.
We have a motion
Thank
and a
you.
second. Thank you. Is there any discussion of the minutes for the August meeting? To my right? To my left? Online? Mr. Wallman, it would be helpful if you had your camera on because I can't see whether you want to be called on or not. Seeing no further comment, can we have a roll call vote on the approval of the August minutes?
Wiltz,
Yes.
Horn,
Yes.
Seaboard,
Yes.
Volan,
Yes.
Samples,
Yes.
Ryderband,
Yes.
Kinsey,
Yes.
Githens,
I'll abstain. I wasn't present.
Ridge,
Yes.
Wallman,
Yes.
Clements,
I'm going to vote no.
sorry, can you repeat that? I missed that.
No.
Bannock. Yes. Nickel.
Yes.
We have 11-1-1.
Thank you. So the minutes are approved. Communications with the chair. First, let me just extend an apology to Ms. Clements and to Mr. Ferris. Although their communications were received after the agenda was published, and despite the fact that they were quite detailed and voluminous, I haven't had a chance to fully dig into their concern. I do recognize that they want this discussed. I do plan to respond to their emails of this week, and I regret that I did not have time to respond before this meeting. It's been a busy week. I will say that if there is one aspect of my response that they should look forward to, it's the question I will have is, how is what they're requesting different than what has already happened? That there have been presentations on many occasions of the plans for these various roads managed by INDOT. So, but I am looking forward to engaging with them. I do recognize, and I want to say specifically to Ms. Clements that I know that this has been frustrating her for a long time. And, I think it deserves better addressing than it has. But that's on me. So I'm looking forward to responding in detail to the emails that were sent this week. And I hope that we can come to a resolution at some near point in the future. With that, we now go to reports from officers and/or committees. Can we have a report from the Technical Advisory Committee?
Nothing to report from the TAC. We have not met since our last meeting, which was a special meeting on August 12th. So our next meeting is our regularly scheduled one later this month.
Thank you. Is there a report from the Citizens Advisory Committee?
Same report. We have not met since our special meeting before the last policy committee meeting.
Thank you. With that, we now move on to reports from MPO staff.
None.
No reports from MPO staff. We now go on to old business. First item is the fiscal year 2022-2026 TIP Amendment Number 1 regarding rural transit. Who is presenting this? Mr. Martin.
Okay, we have here a series of the amendments. These were approved by the policy committee at our last meeting in August 12th. And in your packet is the relevant pages of the Transportation Improvement Program, which were amended in. These are for rural transit, 4 cameras with DVR systems for 10 rural bus vehicles. Monroe County's request for Vernal Pike Connector Road, construction engineering, and then Fullerton Pike Phase 3, fiscal year 23 right-of-way acquisition in the city of Bloomington High Street, intersection modernization and multi-use path. All of those projects use the federal fiscal year 22 IIJA funds totaling, I believe it is $984,198, rounding up to $985,000. These were in process. They were submitted to the Department of Transportation a few days after the policy committee meeting. They're going through a statewide transportation improvement program modification, a STIP amendment modification process. It's currently in a 2-week public comment period. The comment period ends today, and then Monday, everything will automatically be approved and we'll progress from there. We have a tight deadline of using these funds or allocating these funds by the end of this month, 9/30 of 22. And I want to thank the LPAs, all of the LPAs who have been so cooperative with us because we've been on the phone 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day, and then also with the Seymour District and also with the central office staff. Thank you.
So these are non-voting items. Just as are questions for Mr. Martin. To my right. To my left, Ms. Ryderman.
I just want to express appreciation for the delineation so that we could all see that indeed these projects are fiscally constrained, which was not something we could see before we actually voted. We were told, but it's really nice to see it in a real form. And I'm so glad that we'll be actually getting these IIJA funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions to my left? Questions from members online or comments?
I have my hand raised.
Ms. Ridge, please go ahead.
So I want to thank Patrick and Ryan for all the work they did and getting these projects submitted. And I just are all the requirements met for all these submitted projects? Do they all have current POs so that we don't risk losing any of these funds? Because I know that was one of the timeline issues of making sure that these projects have open POs for submittal.
Was that a question?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
Mr. Martin, go ahead.
If all these projects met those guidelines.
Mr. Martin.
Well, the short answer is 3 of them have, the 3 Monroe County project, 4 Monroe County, 3 Monroe County projects, because you've added in Bridge 80,
Bridge 308.
possibly. Yeah, we've got dual tracks on this. Okay, this gets into complexity. NDOT initially told us there was no need to have an open purchase order, and then this week they told us we needed to have an open purchase order. So the goalposts, NDOT central office, so the goalposts have essentially moved a little bit because one part of the central office is telling us one thing and the other part of the central office is telling us another. So what we're doing is we're going through the statewide transportation improvement program amendment process, which is the guideline that was given to us as of the 1st of August. And that did not open up for amendment until September 1st. So we're going through that process right now. And the other process that we were asked to prepare for as a contingency is to add funds into open purchase orders. That's problematic in that only 3 of the projects have open purchase orders and 2 of the projects do not have open purchase orders. The question is, can the central office issue purchase orders in how many days here? 22 days or less. And I believe it can if it wants to, but there's seems to be some doubt in some quarters. So, like I said, we're working both tracks, and all I can say is we have to wait and see because NDOT is in charge of this process. NDOT central office is in charge of the process. We're not. We're doing our best.
Ms. Ridge?
I agree with Pat. I know they're working hard and with the LPAs and trying to get answers and get the proper paperwork submitted. I would hate to lose any of the funds if the guidelines weren't met and projects are not funded because we didn't have open POs. So that was all. Thank you.
Mr. Martin?
All of the guidelines are being met. It's a matter of how fast can the internal central office staff move. That's the question.
Is
Thanks, Patrick.
Is this a matter that the MPO should be following closely enough that we need to be aware of it before our next meeting? For either of you.
But that would be after the deadline.
Well, I know. What I'm saying is because our next meeting is after the deadline, I'm asking as the chair, should I be, is there anything I can do? Is there anything that any of us can do to expedite the matter or to make sure that this doesn't fall through the hoop at NDOT, Mr. Martin?
Staff volunteered to walk it from office to office in the central office.
Ah, okay. Well, in that case, I expect it'll probably get done. Anything else, Ms. Ridge?
No, thank you. I know there's a federal timeline, and then I know, of course, NDOT has to have their time to be able to get the processes done too. So I'm sure NDOT will work their hardest to try and get things through as fast as they can. But again, I know it's been a tight timeline ever since these funds were mentioned. So all we can do is hope that we all get there.
Very good. Any other comments or questions from members online? Seeing none, I think that concludes discussion of those items. Oh, I do have one question. The rural transit, just for the sake of clarity, 4 cameras for 10 buses, that's 4 cameras for each bus, is that correct?
Correct.
So 40 cameras.
40 cameras total,
Okay.
$7,600 in federal funding.
Question answered.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's go on to new business then. Item A is the Bloomington Transit Alternative Fuels and Infrastructure Assessment Study. Who will be presenting that study?
All right, we have some people online who will be presenting the Bloomington Transit Alternative Fuels and Infrastructure Assessment Study. I'll let them be able to unmute themselves and their video, and I will be going through the presentation for them. So I think Mike and Kate and Tamara, I might be missing someone. You can, I guess, start presenting when you're ready.
If you
I'll
would
get your
unmute
slides
and
up here.
can they turn on their video and mute?
Yes, you should be able to unmute on your side.
So
Well-
I think this is Mike. I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes?
Loud and clear.
Anyone else?
Great. I've
Is anyone?
turned on camera. I'm not sure if that's working or not, but
Well, whoever is presenting should please unmute and turn on their camera now because you've been enabled.
Hi, this is Tamara. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Anyone else?
Hi, this is Kate Shaner. Can you hear me?
Very good, thank you, we can hear you. Anyone else? All right, with that, if whoever is going to begin the discussion, if you could introduce yourself with your full name, who you are, and begin your presentation, we thank you.
Just to clarify, should there be someone else? Is there another presenter that we're missing?
I was going to say we have Cynthia Perez also on our team, and she is not being given the option to unmute.
Okay, she has it now. Thanks for letting me know.
Cynthia, you should be good to go.
Oh, yeah. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Glad to
Loud
see
and
you.
clear.
All right,
Perfect.
so if you would begin your presentation, please, but make sure that when you begin speaking, introduce yourself with your full name and your affiliation. Thank you.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I would just like to start with introductions from everyone on our team. My name is Cynthia Perez. I'm an engineer and assistant consultant with WSP. I'm joined here with my team, Mike Martin, Tamara Mahadi, and Kate Shaner. Would you guys like to please introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'll jump in. I'm Mike Martin. I'm out of WSP's Zero Emissions Fleet and Facilities Group. Been with the firm pushing 15 years now, and basically our role is to study transit, maintenance and operations facilities, understand what the functional requirements are there. Originally kind of started out with doing that with focusing on maintenance equipment, circulation patterns, setup, design, anything it took to actually operate those buses and maintain them, and keep the humans safe around them who are there every day. And then since then, we have transitioned quite a bit into the emerging field of zero emissions, and we focus quite a bit on making sure that all of this new infrastructure can actually fit within your site, can operate safely, and can be done in a way that doesn't impact your operations as it's deployed, or at least in a minimalist way as possible. And with that, I'll hand it over to Kate.
Morning. My name is Kate Shaner. I'm a mechanical engineer, and I've been with WSP for just shy of 4 years now, which is exciting. I work with the zero emission vehicles side of the Fleet and Facilities Group. I focus on alternative propulsion and ensuring that your future zero emission vehicles are procured in a strategy that fits well within your operations, and that the technology itself can be adapted to your existing operations in a way that doesn't prevent your service from ongoing as it's planned. And with that, I'll hand it over to Tamara.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tamara. I've been with WSP for 2.5 years now. My background is sustainable transportation planner. So my work is mostly to assess whether the service can be completed once you transition toward any zero emission technology. And also assessing the strategies to address like those service that fails. And I'll hand it back to Cynthia then.
Great, thank you. Just to get started with the presentation, I'd like to provide a little bit of background. Our team was requested to perform a high-level alternative fuel comparison of compressed natural gas, battery electric, and hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. And through this initial analysis, it was determined that we should further analyze battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell electric technologies. Next slide, please. On this slide, this is the information that we used for the analysis. Bloomington Transit has an existing fleet of 24 buses, with 2 buses being battery electric. Bloomington Transit has funding to procure 8 additional battery electric buses and charging stations, and they plan on expanding up to 8 60-foot buses, and they also have the long-term plans to expand up to 10 additional 40-foot battery electric buses. The facility is shared with the university campus bus service, and the university owns the land while Bloomington Transit owns the facilities and structures. The site is currently near capacity, however, there is adjacent land available to be purchased. Next slide, please. This slide shows the results of our initial analysis. We analyzed each alternative fuel with the following metrics and determined that battery electric buses had the most advantages compared to other alternative fuels. Next slide, please. Since this presentation covers a more in-depth analysis than our first iteration, the following updates were made, as shown in the slide. Some updates include the development and analysis of typical and conservative scenarios, updates to fuel requirements, and refining cost estimates. This slide presents a general comparison of battery electric and fuel cell electric technologies, along with their typical infrastructure needed. Although these two technologies are considered electric vehicles and have zero tailpipe emissions, they do vary in their refuel time, range, efficiency, and wheel-to-well emissions. Fuel cell electric buses have shorter refuel time and longer range. Meanwhile, battery electric buses are more efficient and have less wheel-to-well emissions. Next slide, please. Okay. Now I'm going to be handing it off to Tamara for a more detailed analysis of the battery electric buses.
Thank you, Cynthia. So for the battery electric bus technology, the first updated analysis that we did was the service completion analysis. So the aim of the analysis was to assess how much of the current service can be completed by BEV technology in the near term and also in the long term, because we expect the technology to continue to develop and the range of the vehicle itself to improve. And we did the analysis for two kinds of scenarios. First is the typical scenario, which reflects the daily average day. So we use the average day temperature of the year to reflect this condition. And then we also did an analysis for a more conservative scenario, which reflects the worst day of the year. And it usually will be the coldest day of the winter, because BEV in the cold weather usually will require more energy for the heating system. And based on our analysis, we found that in the near term, in 2023, already about 60% of the Bloomington Transit current service can be completed by BEV technology. And in the more conservative scenario, the completion rate will go down to about 36%. But in general, in typical scenario, all vehicles will be able to complete more than half of their assigned routes. And we expect this completion rate to improve over the years, again, as the technology improves. As can be seen in the graph, so in 2035, the completion rate will be approximately about 88% of the current service, or 96% in 2040, and finally 100% in 2050 for the typical scenario. When considering the conservative scenario, the full service completion will happen in 2065. Again, this is using the current service data, and we acknowledge that this might change in the future. Next slide, please. So, as can be seen in the previous slide, there will be some service that cannot be completed by the BEV technology. And here we present some of the strategies that can be considered to complete those failing service, from the least capital intensive to the most capital intensive. And we always recommend transit agencies to do the least capital intensive strategy first. And the first option is to do strategic phasing. So basically prioritizing the shorter service to be electrified first and leave the longest service to be electrified later. So it allows for the technology to mature and for the range to catch up with the needs of the service. And then the next, go back to the previous slide. So the next option is to do service changes, which basically without without reducing the current service, the block that is currently longer can be split to smaller portions and utilize the spare vehicles to complete those services without any additional number of buses added to the fleet. The next option will be to utilize BEB with better efficiency, because currently there are several services that are assigned to smaller bus size, and their BEB equivalent usually have smaller battery size, which means smaller range. So just by assigning those services to bigger buses might already solve the service completion problem. And lastly, there are several strategies that are more capital intensive, such as adding additional BEBs to the fleet. So the replacement will not be one ICE to one BEB. It might be one ICE to two BEBs, which definitely will need more capital. Or maybe adding fuel cell technology to the fleet, or adding opportunity charging on the route so that the vehicles can charge during the service, which again will require more capital, and we recommend Bloomington Transit to do a deeper dive if Bloomington Transit wants to explore these strategies. Next slide, please. So another analysis that we did was the energy requirement, and the aim of this analysis was to provide a very initial high-level analysis about what kind of charger will be needed to fully charge the vehicle so that they can fully complete the service on the next day. And the graph shows the need for the current fleet, which is before the expansion and the new BEBs added to the fleet. And it also shows the need for future fleet after the expansion of the fleet. So based on our analysis, most of the service will only need between 75 to 150 kilowatt charger. And one 150 kilowatt charger can be used to charge two buses. There might be a need for a faster charger for the conservative scenario during the most challenging day. One faster charger, about like 300 kilowatt charger, can be added if needed. And based on our calculation, without any optimization of when to charge, the maximum peak load needs will be about 2.3 in the near term, 2.3 megawatt in the near term, or like 3.9 megawatt in the future. However, again, there are ways to minimize this peak load, such as by utilizing charge management system, which is a software that will create the most optimum charging schedule to reduce the utility cost and also the peak load that will be needed to charge the whole fleet. Next slide, please. And based on those analyses, we came up with 3 options for the full transition towards a full BEB fleet. The first option is aiming for 2035 full BEB fleet, which means about 88% of the service can be completed just by waiting for the technology to improve. And the remaining failing service can be completed by using better vehicles, better efficiency vehicles, or by doing service changes. The second option will be to aim for full transition in 2040, which means about 95% of the blocks can be completed just by waiting for the technology to improve. And the remaining blocks can be completed by doing the service changes. And lastly, aiming for 2050 full transition, where all blocks can be completed by just waiting for the technology to develop without any additional strategies needed. And now I will pass it over to Kate for the fuel cell technology.
Thanks, Tamara. So I'm going to run over a few of the trade-offs compared to BEB that we get with fuel cell electric buses. First off, fuel cell electric buses have a range of 250 miles, which can cover most of your existing service profile on a single fuel. There are a few routes under typical conditions that cannot be covered by fuel cell electric buses, but even under conservative conditions, your wintriest day, 85% of your existing service can be covered by today's fuel cell electric bus technology. Currently, there are only 3 fuel cell electric buses on the market, 40 and 60 foot option by New Flyer and a 40-foot option by Eldorado National. Eldorado National has designs in place for a 35-foot option, but they haven't actually produced it yet. So it's a much smaller vehicle market. But the range is already there to cover most of your service, and we expect technology to continue to improve over the next 5 to 10 years to mitigate any range issues in completing your service. Next slide. We've calculated, instead of your energy requirements, your daily fueling requirements under typical and conservative scenarios. Hydrogen fuel is measured in kilograms of compressed gas. Your average fuel cell bus will consume about 28 kilograms a day, which equates to 582 kilograms under a typical scenario for your daily consumption and 735 under your conservative scenario. We recommend sizing any fueling equipment to that conservative scenario to allow for a little bit more flexibility. And today's storage equipment, which we'll go over in a little bit more depth in Mike's section, can reasonably cover about a week's worth of fuel, give or take, under conservative conditions. We really recommend getting fuel delivered on site when we first start out in a fuel cell electric bus operation, as on-site production can get very complicated and expensive very quickly. Next slide. So this kind of gives an idea of the physical space required for on-site fuel storage. On the left is a photograph of OCTA Orange County Transit's hydrogen fueling station, fuel storage. So what you're looking at is about a 30 by 60-ish foot footprint, which contains compression equipment and a large gas tank that can fuel up to 50 vehicles. That tank's about the size of a shipping container, and it can be located either horizontally or vertically. So you could rotate the thing 90 degrees and have it standing up. So that's the footprint of the equipment itself. The National Fire Protection Agency requires some pretty large setbacks from property lines, buildings, air intakes, other vehicles to ensure that this lighter than air gas can't escape and become ignited. And we'll show those a bit further later on in this presentation. The other consideration with hydrogen fuel cell vehicles is your maintenance area. If you're maintaining your vehicles indoors, those indoor areas need to have upgraded ventilation systems to evacuate any hydrogen that may leak from your vehicle tanks. Next slide. So this kind of gives an overview of the different types of on-site fuel that you can receive for hydrogen. So on the left is a schematic of just a fuel storage system with that tank vertically, oriented vertically, so you can kind of diminish the area by making your tank upright instead of laying on its side. But it still takes up quite a bit of space, and this diagram doesn't show the setbacks that would be required. There are 2 types of on-site fuel production that currently exist in our options for you. We don't recommend them due to their expense and physical footprint required, but we do want to go over them so you have an understanding of what they are. First is steam methane reformation. You would bring natural gas onto your site and reform it into its components, carbon and hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, and you would take that hydrogen and fuel your buses with it. Equipment for it starts out about the size of a shipping container and moves up from there and would likely require on-site fuel storage in addition to production equipment. The next type is electrolysis. Electrolysis, you bring in water and a lot of electricity, and you split your water into hydrogen and oxygen. You put the hydrogen in your bus, you release the oxygen. It's a great option if you have a lot of space. It's a great option if you have cheap electricity and water in your area. It becomes less of a great option if you don't have that physical footprint available and don't have cheap water and power. It also is the most expensive option for bringing fuel to your site under today's technology conditions. Next slide. So good news back for FCEV, you can complete most of your service today, no problem with this technology. By 2035, we expect the technology improved that you can complete all of your service, but there are some definite hiccups in the path of getting fuel to your site and storing fuel on your site in terms of space and upfront cost. And I'm going to hand it back to Cynthia to go over some of those costs more in depth.
Thanks, Kate. In the following slides, I'll be providing an overview of the life cycle cost comparisons for battery electric and fuel cell electric buses. For capital costs, BEBs have a lower infrastructure and bus costs than fuel cell electric buses, as shown in the table. The total capital cost to replace the existing fleet is approximately $48.2 million. Meanwhile, the cost would be over $60 million for a fuel cell electric bus fleet. I would like to note that these cost estimates do not include the facility or utility upgrades, since they vary greatly for each agency. Next slide, please. For the maintenance cost, the cost of delivered hydrogen has the lowest compared to the on-site production of hydrogen and battery electric buses. I would also like to note here that the annual and lifetime maintenance costs were calculated only for the weekday service vehicles, since they would be using the most amount of mileage and fuel. Next slide, please. For the fuel costs, BEBs have a lower cost per mile and lifetime cost when compared to fuel cell electric buses. We also included here the fuel cost for the typical and conservative scenarios, since the cost of electricity and hydrogen varies depending on these factors. And like in the previous slide, these estimates also only consider the weekday service vehicles. Next slide, please. After analyzing all the previous categories, it was determined that the total estimated life cycle cost for battery electric buses would be lower than fuel cell electric buses. The total life cycle cost for fuel cell electric buses is approximately $20 million more than battery electric buses. But it is important to keep in mind that these cost estimates do not include any planned expansions, nor do they include the cost of adding any additional vehicle to meet the existing block requirements. I'm now going to hand it over to Mike to discuss the facilities.
Thank you very much. So we just got extremely detailed and great information there, and now everyone gets to watch me play with the Lego blocks here and do some Tetris on the site. So as noted, you've got your existing site with 42 buses, just for a kind of rough overlay here. So what you see in the tracked parking in the center of your screen is a canopy covered parking area. There are two existing battery electric buses, basically right between the middle jog there, with existing ground mounted charging in between the column space. And then outside of that, everything is traditional battery or traditional, conventional internal combustion engines. You do note, currently, there are buses that are required to park outside of that programmed parking area. We were looking at the fleet of the 42 existing vehicles. There are 25 Indiana University vehicles that are also sharing that site, and they share a portion of the maintenance facility. Those are not officially a part of this study. We did kind of note some options for, where layouts would work well for them or might give the future availability of tying them in as well, since it is a shared site, and we do understand that. Again, on the top of your screen here, as you're looking at it, we have the shared maintenance building. The little knuckle that you see drop down off of there is an enclosed wash and steam bay, which is basically a chassis wash where you can spray out underneath the vehicle and clean it off. Both of those are sized for a 40-foot vehicle currently, 40-foot or smaller. And then you have the administration and operations facility just on the top left of your screen. Your existing electrical infrastructure comes in from the top left corner of your site as you're looking at the screen here, feed down along underneath that parking lot into the bottom right corner of the employee parking lot next to the admin and ops area. And that feeds all of the infrastructure that serves your current battery electric bus charging equipment. So basically those two pilot positions are located there or fed from there and then located under the canopy. There's trenching that occurs underground to get over to serve those positions. So, and then there's again, a canopy covered fueling island just to the right of that parking. So as you can see, this is a very tight site. You have just enough space to make all of your turns with buses. You can safely circulate. You enter and have a good counterclockwise flow, so that works very well. But it is tight. You do have kind of a crush parking scenario already as it stands, even before introducing some of the requirements of zero emissions infrastructure. So let's just step forward and we'll see a clean layout of this same site. This is basically just taking off the aerial so you can get kind of a cleaner look at it. One item to note, you see the blue hatched area just below the site. That's where we have an existing creek that runs, runs adjacent here. There have been flooding incidents. So one of the pieces of what we were trying to look at during this feasibility study was how do we make this a resilient operation? How do we get this equipment out of harm's way? And if we're looking at potentially mitigating that, where does zero emissions fall in there? And let's go ahead and step forward. One item that we were tasked with looking at here is, okay, we know what the realities are of your existing site. What does it open up? What can be done if there is feasible expansion? So while we don't have any costing or real estate analysis to this, that wasn't part of our scope. We did look at the reality of this adjacent kind of, car junkyard that's possibly something that you could expand into and acquire as options. So this shows, basically the outline of that area. If you were to take this, you would more or less smooth it out, get it to the right topography, which it actually works pretty well. There's not a major grade change here, and provide some access. So there is one pinch point you'll see. There's a existing bridge that goes over that creek that's on site. And when we look at that, that's probably something that would be difficult to move forward with. You would probably want to build something larger or more robust to have consistent bus traffic over there. So we noted that as a challenging spot in any concepts that utilize that space, not directly adjacent, but across the creek. Now let's go ahead and keep moving. The next one will just be a clean variant of that. I think for sake of time, we'll keep jumping. One more item we looked at is just if we decided that we needed to utilize some on-route or opportunity charging. So basically, as noted, if there's some routes that can't quite make it with the range of the technology when they're purchased, one way to mitigate that is to have opportunity charging, take a bus while it's on route and actually at a transfer center or a stop. You can capture those 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever your layover time is, at a higher power charging. And so this is your existing layout. Basically, everything is canopy covered on your spots, which does present some challenges and dictates a little bit of what we would set up. You have an existing electrical yard right next to your actual transfer center facility. Possibly you could size some equipment in there, but it's probably would be easier to expand that slightly if we move to a battery electric charging. Obviously, if we go to a hydrogen fuel cell, no modifications required here. Those operate similar to an internal combustion in that regard. So let's go ahead and jump forward. Again, clean, but we can jump forward. All right. As we walked through your sites, we basically took a look at what is existing, what would need to be mitigated to either achieve battery electric bus operations and maintenance, or hydrogen fuel cell electric bus maintenance. For battery electric bus, you've got good clearances. Traditionally, buses have been moving more and more components to the top of the bus. That is only being exacerbated by the technologies that we're utilizing now. Fuel cell electric buses and battery electric buses, more and more equipment is going up top. So overhead clearance is always very, very important. Excellent overhead clearance in your facility. What we would want to look into would be either having some mobile scaffolding or perhaps introducing a overhead monorail beam so that staff who worked on top of these buses or had to access anything on top of the bus could tie off for safe operation and to perform their tasks. But both of them have great clearances for that. You'll note that there are some, see if you can see them in the picture on your top right, you have some heating fans. Those, amongst some other lighting issues and just existing layout on this, would require some remediation to operate hydrogen and fuel cell buses. When you're operating with hydrogen, it is a lighter than air fuel, so it can become trapped up in your beams. Would require some mitigation, which we'll go through shortly, on your exhaust ducting, heating, possibly lighting for explosion proof. I think you're possibly outside the exclusion zone there, but there'll be some minor modifications to the facility. Overall, though, you're in actually pretty solid shape within these facilities, but there are some challenges that would require updates. So go ahead and step forward. Wash bays, very similar scenario, good overhead clearance, but we wouldn't be expecting as much requirement on that. Where we're gonna run into issues here is still gonna be lighting type, areas where we're gonna have to mitigate with exhaust so we don't have hydrogen cooling up at the ceiling level. And then we don't have, we have some open flame type exposure. If you look, there is a hot water, high pressure, natural gas driven pressure washer in that bottom left corner. That would have to be isolated to be safe with hydrogen fuel cell. No mitigation required for battery electric. And then this is the existing fuel island. It is an open air canopy. This would very likely actually work well for a hydrogen fuel cell setup. And one misnomer I want to always run through is we quite often get the question of, well, can we get rid of that fuel island as soon as we go to a battery electric bus scenario? The answer on that is no, because that's still going to be a nightly service cycle area. You have to get someone out there to sweep out the bus, do quick top offs on fluids, any type of just quick service as it enters the site. That is still going to occur every night. Battery electric bus, hydrogen fuel cell, no change. So those tend to be kind of a static operation. But we believe that this would actually work with hydrogen fuel cell. The only mitigation might be cutting a slight peak vent just to allow gas to escape if required, which would be the same as we step forward on the parking canopy. Again, we have enough open air and air exchange here that hydrogen fuel cell could work. This overhead structure does not have capacity to support pantographs or any other type of overhead electrical distribution at a scale that would be required to serve this entire fleet. So our recommendation would be that if you move into a battery electric scenario, you remove this entire canopy, or at least the portion that's going to be serving your fleet, and change that to the modular system that we're noting out here and basing around. On the bottom right there, you're seeing again those kind of wall parked buses that are in a crush park scenario because you do not have dedicated parking spaces available to them. And then top right, those are your column spacing mounted existing charging units. So we will step forward. All right, so what we looked at here is the existing fleet, and we basically tested this out in two ways. The existing fleet at 42 buses, and we came to a solution of 66 buses based on some realistic expansion that could be served on this fleet. This site, you could probably move that forward, certainly a few more Arctics, different fleet mix, but this is what we actually concepted against. And we tried to do this so that 40-foot buses can always be, would always be able to be accommodated. So if your fleet mix does change, If we noted that one of the ways to mitigate some service issues and shortcomings on battery electric is to go with a 40-foot bus because those tend to have a little bit better capacity and range. All positions can accommodate a 40-foot bus, so if your service changed and you made that move, we've accommodated that in this feasibility study.
If I can just break in,
Jump forward.
if I can just break in for a second, I'm trying to keep an eye on time. We do have another presentation today that'll take about 15 minutes. So we have about 15 minutes left for the presentation and questions. So if it's possible to move a little faster, we would appreciate it. But I just wanted to let you know.
Thank you for the heads up. I will skedaddle.
Thank you.
All right, let's step forward then. Yes. So when we're looking at battery electric buses, we did this in a way that we could try and compare apples to apples, also what we think is viable for your site and resiliency. As noted, those are looking at depot charged 2-to-1 charger to dispenser ratio. That means every charging cabinet serves 2 buses via either a plug-in, that would be overhead, or pantograph, that's an articulated arm that drops down and actually connects to the bus and makes that charging autonomous a little bit more. Either one works. There's no space difference as far as that's concerned, and the modular frame serves either. So this is a study that can take either of those. And we noted that we went with a modular overhead frame structure for the following reasons. The site is extremely constrained. You simply cannot fit ground-mounted chargers past those column spaces that you currently have, and your parking spaces are not large enough to support having the charging share that space. So it has to be an overhead without expansion. Even with expansion, that is traditionally the best way to do it because of resiliency. You have a stream right next to you with a recent flooding event in your history. Anything overhead is going to be safer, and it means that basically, as long as the bus itself is not flooded, which under an extreme scenario, you can move it off-site, you'll be able to keep your site running and return to operations as soon as that's down. And then, just as noted, that's the maximum capacity, and we know you're constrained, and we're working on that. For the transit center, we noted that a 450 kilowatt charger would be the required or recommended to make the charging useful during that dwell time. That would typically be an overhead pantograph. We don't recommend plugging on that because the public can get too much access to it. It also requires a driver to plug it in. And finally, it's an extremely expensive and difficult to wield cord at that type of kilowatt charging. And induction is not recommended right now because there are 2 competing manufacturers and there's not a standard. So during this feasibility, we noted we want something that would be kind of future-proof. Induction charging, when that comes to a standard, that would come back into play. But until then, if you're before that standard, we would stick with pantograph and keep moving forward. All right, what you see here is just a quick calculation based on battery size, safety factor, which is basically stating you wouldn't bring your bus back in lower than 25% stated charge, and the charge required. You'll note these numbers are a little bit higher here. These are connected loads. So this is the maximum if you fired every single thing up at once, what could possibly be required, not balanced against timing or balanced against any charge management. This is a way we look at it with the utility company, and then we usually dial back once we factor in those other items. But let's keep moving for time. Okay, so this is the first pass at how you could accommodate a charging scenario without expanding your site. So under this, the Bloomington transit fleet basically fits in, same footprint. We're looking at a very similar parking configuration utilizing similar jogs with that overhead frame structure. What you see in the pink area is a decked area. So that is a decked area that is holding your charging cabinets and all of your transformer and switchgear lineup. Basically, your utility feed would trench over to a column and then feed up that column into those switchgear and then out to your charging cabinets. And then from those charging cabinets, they would go on the underside of that overhead frame, typically built every 5 feet on the center with joists. And those would feed either a pantograph or a plug-in position to the bus below. As noted, those are all showing 40-foot buses because a 40-foot space can accommodate smaller. And we wanted to keep that flexibility knowing that that might be a requirement. So when you look at this, the IU buses have now been the displaced vehicles. Those are now in the crush parking scenario. They do not require any charging under this. So we left them as the displaced buses because the parking would not be an issue there. So you can do your expansion, without site expansion, you can meet the needs of the entire Bloomington Transit existing fleet. It's very challenging to get any type of growth on this site just based on the crushed parking. If IU were to decide that they wanted to electrify as well, you would not be able to electrify their entire fleet. And this is going to be extremely difficult to construct because you have nowhere to utilize for construction staging. When you come in and have to actually have columns being built, doing demo on your overhead canopy, your existing buses really have nowhere to park. So let's go ahead and step forward. This is utilizing the projected fleet on the expanded site. So at this point, you're taking all 66 of those vehicles and you're basically just expanding them out into the space that was utilized partially by the conventional IU fleet. And then we're going into that new junkyard site, constructing a secondary overhead platform yard. And basically when you look at these in the concept of a more detailed and larger screen, it's typically every 4 rows you have your column spacing. That's a pretty standard setup for the span that you can get to before you start having extreme steel costs. And so it's kind of standard framing that allows for that. This scenario also gives you the availability to have your IU fleet electrified. Note, all of these concepts are sized in basic setups so that you could mount overhead photovoltaic above these frames. So you could basically have a decked parking scenario similar to where you have a canopy covered, but you could utilize photovoltaic to actually be gaining back some costs. Solar does not, it's only a drop in the bucket on the power you actually use to charge these vehicles, but it does help you to, you basically capture costs during the day when rates are higher, and then typically depending on your setup, you can be pulling out energy when the buses are home at night. This is a huge benefit because you can build that secondary or the first set of charging and energize the whole yard while utilizing the flat portion of your yard that you paved on your expansion as your bus parking during the transition period. So this is much easier to implement, which is a huge benefit to expanding your site. Keep running forward. This is just an option we met to say if you had, aspirations to go much, much larger, could you even do more of that? This is just showing that you can get a much larger amount of space here. If you utilize that bottom portion of the expansion as well, it gives you more space to have future expansion. There are some challenges though. Your maintenance facility is probably not sized for this and will require major upgrades or additions to do that. And then you're going to have that stream crossing where you're going to need to look at doing some engineering to make sure that that can handle bus design. So let's just keep running forward. And anyone feel free to stop me for questions, but I know we're going quick, so I'm trying to keep going there. And again, similar to this is just showing that space. Let's step forward one more time. I want to get the hydrogen concept.
We got about 5 minutes left, so yeah.
Yep. So for the transfer center, what we would recommend here is utilizing the space where you already have an existing feed coming in. There probably is feed. Your other sites, you likely will need new electrical feeds. The amount of power you're bringing is going to be well outside the scope of anything you currently have. That may not be the case at the transfer center, actually, since this is only 2 positions, but we would expect this is going to be sized too large unless you do decking over your existing electrical yard. So you probably space this out in the forward-facing areas. Don't need to isolate it, but you can if you want. This shows 2 overhead mast arm supported pantograph positions at 450 kW to achieve that quote-unquote fast charge. It would require you, based on the clearance heights of your existing canopy, to demo a portion of that covered area. So your existing canopy is too short for that, also doesn't have the capacity to hold those pantographs, so it would require new construction and some demo. And let's step forward. All right, so for battery electric buses, ground mounted will not work for your facility. Your existing parking canopy can't support it, and your existing fleet can be charged within the existing site, but anything projected requires that you expand this site. We recommend that you do look at acquiring that site because that would greatly ease the transition process. And let's step forward to hydrogen. All right, I'll skip going over the deliveries and SMR. Kate did a good job of running through that already. But one of the other items to note is we were looking at this to try and reuse your existing fuel island It provides the simplest deployment. It also allows for the simplest circulation pattern instead of having separate isolated circulation patterns for two fueling types. We tried to minimize the piping from storage. Due to the size of the hydrogen molecule, it is extremely difficult not to have leaks, and that has extreme costs for the specific piping type that's utilized to do that. We don't expect it's viable to pipe that across the existing stream. That becomes too much of a cost and too much of a mitigation factor, so we did not study that. If it's on the other side, it's fueled on the other side. And then the existing canopies should be able to handle lighter than air fuels with minor modifications. Also note as we step forward that natural gas study was considered for this for site footprints, but we did not actually develop those. The natural gas can fit within a smaller footprint than a hydrogen study. So if you do decide that you're not going to go zero emissions and go that way, everything that's feasible with hydrogen is even more so feasible with natural gas for concepting. And let's step forward. So again, when we go to the maintenance facilities, you can't have any open flame heating system. You have to have non-combustible walls and ceilings, standby power for all monitoring systems. Anytime you're doing major overhaul, you have to have a way to defuel and store that hydrogen. You would take all new detection systems and alarming systems, new mechanical exhaust, and new designated spaces and automatic fire suppression that's required due to the lighter than air fuel. And keep stepping forward. Next slide. Oh, there we go. So this is showing what we're looking at for trying to do this within your existing site. So there's simply inadequate space for some of the setbacks you've got. As noted, some of those setbacks are intake of a building, site walls, site perimeter, and vehicle parking. Really, we also just can't make this based on the turning of the buses in that existing fueling area, and it's just too tight of a space. You could do some mitigation with blast walls and other explosion-proof setup. It would not be a recommended item, though. And again, what you're looking at here is those maintenance bays utilized by IU cannot be, you can't make the turn into it with this.
Mr. Martin,
So-
I hate to interrupt. I hate to interrupt, but I would ask you to move to the key findings because we only have about 2 minutes left for the presentation.
All right, let's look at the next slide and then go to key findings. So again, this just shows that you can accommodate it as soon as you move to the expanded site. So it is viable as soon as you move to expanded site. You can only do on-site generation while utilizing the full site, which is not recommended based on the circulation. So go ahead and step to takeaways of hydrogen. Let's get there. Sure, we'll just jump to here. This will work. I think Cynthia, you were going to present these?
Yes. Just to quickly go over the key findings, through this analysis, it was found that BEVs are less costly and have lower life cycle emissions when compared to fuel cell electric buses. However, battery electric buses would take the longest to transition. With current battery electric technology, approximately 60% of the current blocks can be completed in the typical scenario. And for fuel cell electric buses, it was found that they are viable under the multiple fueling scenarios. However, large on-site electrolysis is extremely nascent, and SMR produces greenhouse gas emissions on-site. With the current fuel cell electric technology, approximately 95% of the blocks can be completed in the typical scenario. And the fueling infrastructure to support these vehicles requires a large on-site footprint and high upfront capital costs. And for the cost analysis, when analyzing the costs for both alternative fuels, it was found that battery electric buses have a lower life cycle cost estimate when compared to the fuel cell electric buses. And next slide, please. Okay, and in this following slide, we'll be reviewing some of our recommendations and next steps. First, the transition timeline goals should be first considered when determining the best fit technology. And our recommendation is to further pursue BEV technology. However, a small scale fuel cell pilot can also be helpful to implement and analyze. And once a fuel type is determined, the team should begin detailed design and conversations with stakeholders early on. Sorry that I sped through those last few slides, but this concludes our presentation. Are there any questions?
Well, thank you for the presentation. It was very informative, very detailed. I would now like to open up the floor to a brief round of questions. Are there any questions for this study of Bloomington Transit? And again, I'd like to invite Mr. Horn from the Transit Board if he has any particular things to add. But I'll start with those of my colleagues who are online. Can we see some of the other people who are, some of our colleagues who are here online? Or maybe I could ask any board member who's online, committee member, to speak up if they have a question. Are there any questions on my left? Commissioner Githens.
Yes, well, first of all, how safe are the hydrogen storage units? And also, how safe is the transfer of hydrogen if you're having delivery done in tanks?
Well, I'll take that on. There's really no expectation of massive issues with that. That is dictated by National Fire, NFPA code, those setbacks. So hydrogen is extremely volatile, but exterior storage is a pretty safe and routine understood setup within that. Obviously, anything in a tanker truck when it's on the road, it's outside of your control. But again, those are typically well mitigated and designed against any type of impact. So we don't see any massive impacts to safety based on those. The challenges are just meeting the safety requirements within your facility that are dictated by code once you accept that fuel on your site. Hopefully that helps answer the question.
Then how safe are the hydrogen tanks on the buses, especially if the buses are involved in a crash?
I have not heard of any hydrogen fuel cell electric bus crashes. I can't really speak to what happens. Typically, the biggest fear on the lighter than air fuels is really just in entrapped spaces, though. Similar to a diesel bus, under a perfect scenario, you can certainly have an explosion. But the hydrogen in particular, due to its extremely light nature, once there is any type of piercing or leak within that, it escapes its tank extremely rapidly and dissipates, gets out in the atmosphere. And hydrogen itself, once it's outside of the basically the right mix for combustion, is a non-issue within the environment.
Ms. Reiterband.
Yeah, is there consistency amongst the manufacturers of the electric, the BEBs, I guess we're calling them, in terms of how they are fueled? Is there any change in the charging units themselves amongst the different manufacturers as things progress, and we hope that they would progress? How much retrofitting do we anticipate to accommodate the changes in technology moving forward? I've seen this in other areas, and I'm a bit concerned because I understand with some of the electric vehicles that we have out here, we don't all use the same kind of charging. So is there consistency across the board with the bus manufacturers?
I can speak to that one as well, actually. So it's a great question, and it is absolutely something that plagued the battery electric bus industry on the kind of infancy and first steps. There were buses that were taking direct AC power and had an onboard DC rectifier. Virtually everything we look at now is all DC charging, which is what we're looking at here. Past that, I noted there's 3 ways to connect. There's a plug-in, an overhead pantograph, where it basically drops down and touches, and then an induction pad. Part of the reason we're not doing the induction in this feasibility is because we're trying to look at something that is more future-proof where there is a standard. There's no high power standard for induction. There's a low power standard for passenger vehicles that does not apply to buses. So we removed that from this study based on the criteria of trying to keep future-proof designs. When you look at plug-in, And pantograph, there are standards. There are SAE standards. For the plug, it's the JS 1772 standard. And then for a pantograph at a high power charging, which we are under these scenarios, it's the JS 3105. Those are accepted, fully national. Virtually any bus that you take is going to be adhered to those standards. You can spec that. We don't expect those to change. Certainly, there's still always coordination issues. Making sure that you're specifying a bus within the battery voltage range. As battery capacities go higher, there's some higher voltages being noted out here. But all equipment is basically based on those standards now going to be future-proof for the long term. That's why we only looked at those two technologies under this study. Additionally, part of what we looked at was not kind of taking it to the razor's edge as far as ground matter or anything along those lines. That's why we looked at that overhead modular frame. Great example is there's some new technology out. We call it, quote unquote, a big box. Instead of being 2-to-1 chargers, it's a huge box that can do 20 dispensers off of one charger. That modular system we've come up with is engineered, so that you could actually utilize something more along those lines as well. So future-proofing and understanding that by the time you actually deploy this or start looking at deploying this, that the landscape will have changed is certainly something we did our best at looking into the crystal ball of and hoped to mitigate as much as humanly possible. So hopefully that helps.
We are running well over time. I've only got time for one more question from Councilmember Wiltz. Okay, Ms. Githens.
I wanted to know about, there was things in there for 60-foot buses, and I didn't see any of the design or the cost for 60-foot buses.
At this point, well, can you answer that briefly?
Really quick. We showed, what it would take to actually handle a 60-foot bus on your site. We showed what that would take as far as just expanding out footprint-wise and then making sure that that's addressed in your maintenance areas. But that was not part of the scope of this, is updating lifts or anything along those lines. We just showed what they would take for the charging positions and their battery packs.
With that, I have to call it. We want to thank you very much for the exhaustive presentation. It's meant much food for thought and very interesting. We appreciate it. We thank you for your time. We are running a little bit late, but I'd still like to get in Mr. Jackson. Our next presentation is presentation of Go Bloomington. Mr. Jackson, how quickly can you?
5 minutes.
All right, that would be fantastic.
In Miami, this is when they start passing out the Cafe Cubano. Cafe Joel.
Thanks, by the way, to the presenters. All right, next.
And I only have 50 slides. It's a pleasure to be here today. This is the second group I presented Go Bloomington to date. Last week I presented to the Common Council for the first time. Next slide, please. Transportation Demand Management Plan was completed by the City of Bloomington in May 2020. The TDM mission is to reduce the number of single occupant vehicles operating within Bloomington. That's only half true because of commutes from outside the city, from the county. This is clearly a county-wide benefit in terms of providing access to all the modes of transportation and providing our matching software program, which helps people find carpool, vanpool matches, and those kinds of things, which I'll get to here in a little bit. Reducing SOVs will decrease carbon emissions, relieve traffic congestion, and increase parking capacity. Really, that increased parking capacity is probably better said by improving parking availability. I was hired last November. My background is I graduated from IU back in the day with the transportation major in SPIA. I spent time working for transit authorities in Orlando, Tampa, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach, Miami, and Indianapolis. And at all those locations, I worked directly with the MPOs. Next slide, please. Our branding effort, because most folks don't know what TDM is, or Transportation Demand Management is we hired an advertising agency, a firm agency, and they, through a selection process, we picked Go Bloomington. Our tagline is mobility options for a better commute. Next slide, please. We also have launched our website, gobloomington.org. in June. Right Amigos, who provides the matching software, has local DNA. They're a local company with two of the founding officers. Actually, Chief Security Officer and Chief Technical Officer live here in Bloomington. Next slide, please. Our marketing plan is being implemented as we speak. As I mentioned, we had our launch. Well, maybe I didn't mention it, but we had our formal launch in City Hall Plaza this Tuesday. And we had a BT bus there with their exterior ad that's on it that are running around town. We had a Commute with Enterprise van available that was branded. We launched some Lime e-bikes that are co-branded Go Bloomington. Next slide, please. On one of our pages in our website, we list employer, business, and community participants. These are not folks that are sponsors or partners. They're just folks that have helped to date get us up and running and play a role in hopefully Go Bloomington's future success. And as we move forward, we hope to dramatically increase the number of participants on that list. Next slide, please. Now, I understand where we are in the process. The MPO is going to have a call for projects at some point, either later this year or early next. Being a city employee, we will work through the process with the city. My goal is to have us included in the city's list of projects to be included on the call for projects. If that does happen, a couple of traditional funding, the traditional funding sources through the Federal Transit Administration. BT is the designated recipient, so I've talked to John Connell on several occasions about potential for accessing some monies that have been freed up in the infrastructure bill and some other formula funding and discretionary fundings that exist through the Federal Transit Administration. The new infrastructure bill includes the carbon reduction formula funding. TDM programs are specifically eligible for these funds. And the 6 MPOs I worked with in the past, they usually get some pushback because they feel like you're coming to try and get a piece of the finite pie. The good news about this infrastructure bill and about carbon reduction formula funding is it's new funding source. We're a new funding entity. So if the city decides to move this project through the MPO process, that's something I would recommend to them and to this body at some point in the future. I'm scheduled to speak on the 28th to the Citizen Advisory Committee and the Technical Advisory Committee, where I'll get in more detail with all those subjects. Next slide. And then this is just an example of what my request would be to the city. It's just facts that I know today. The city's going through their budget process. If my budget's approved, or if Go Bloomington's budget is approved, it'll look like the total of $318,000 and change. We get some ARPA funding now, so we do get some federal funding, but that's going to sunset. The TDM plan that was done by the city called for looking for federal funding, and the consultant they used identified surface transportation block grant funds as a potential funding source. Of course, when the study was done, the pandemic was just hitting, and who knew that we'd have this new infrastructure bill with these new funding sources. Again, there's the carbon reduction formula request amount. That assumes that we were going after an 80% match. My goals with the city that have been submitted to the council is a 50-50 match. Again, if the city decides to include this project in the call for projects list. Next slide, please. Any questions?
Well done. Thank you for bringing it in 5 minutes. Appreciate that.
Sure.
Are there questions for the new Go Bloomington program to my right? Does everybody understand what it is? To my left, questions? Are there members of the committee online who have questions for Mr. Jackson? Going once, going twice. Mr. Jackson, thank you for the presentation. We hope that you are successful in reducing single occupancy vehicles. And if there's anything else that we can do or that any new reports you can bring us, we would be most welcoming.
Well, I appreciate it. I look forward to working with staff and with your committees, and hopefully see you again in the future. Have a great day.
Thank you. We now move to item 9, public comment on matters not included on the agenda. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to the MPO on items that are not on the agenda? Is there anybody online who would like to speak? Mr. Clemens. If you would like to speak, please use the raise hand function in Zoom, or type into the chat, and Mr. Clemens will call on you. First call for public comment. Second call for public comment. Please use the raise hand function in Zoom or type into the chat. Final call for public comment. Mr. Clemens, anybody? All right. Seeing none, we go to communications from committee members. We have communications on the State Road 45 corridor. Ms. Clemens, would you like to address this?
I covered that at the beginning, and I really would appreciate attention to this issue. It's something that I've been trying to bring up and raise for several years now, and really repeat my, I guess, surprise and alarm that despite repeated efforts to discuss this item, that it continues to be unaddressed, and I find that very bewildering. So thank you.
Thank you. Topic suggestions for future agendas? Seeing none, we'll move to a review. Are there any? All right. Upcoming meetings. Can we have a rundown of, Mr. Martin?
I'm sorry, Chris Wallman is online to provide an update on the Stewart 45 timeline.
Mr. Wallman, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Yeah, sorry. I will be sharing a very brief timeline of the projects that are along the State Road 45 corridor, where we currently stand. I know these projects have been a matter of interest to a lot of you on this board, and I just want to preface this. It's going to be kind of just a high-level overview. Won't really be going into too many design details. But with that being said, we have 3 projects along 10th Street, State Road 45, currently in development with NDOT. The first one is DES number, when I say DES number, that's our project tracking number. DES number 18,086, 18,00086. That's State Road 45 from the Bloomington bypass to Pete Ellis Drive. That's an added travel lanes project. Currently, there's 1 travel lane each direction. And this project will be adding an additional travel lane, so you have 2 lanes each direction. Also, the second project we have is 1800-199, 1800199. That is State Road 45 intersection at Pete Ellis and Discovery Parkway. This is an intersection improvement where we're adding a signal and some added auxiliary lanes, some dedicated right and left turn lanes on each leg. So those are 2 fully funded projects at that time. We have a third one that's a provisional project, and I'll get into what a provisional project is here in a minute, but our third one is DES number 2031, State Road 45 from Pete Ellis, Discovery Parkway to North Russell Road. This is a mobility improvement project. Right now the scope of work is still being under development. Preliminary scope includes road widening and construction of bike bed facilities along this stretch of roadway. So for the first 2 projects I mentioned, that's everything from the bypass to the intersection at Pete Ellis and Discovery Parkway. Those 2 projects are within, they're developing at the same time. Okay, so they're going to go be under the same construction contract. We're currently working on finishing up preliminary plans, and so these will be due this October from our consultant. They'll go through some NDOT review after we get those in. We also have a draft version of the environmental document being developed that is also due for this October, and we currently plan on offering a public meeting around the first of the year in 2023. So we get those preliminary plans in, they're going to go through their review, the environmental documents can go through its review. In a perfect timeline, that would be around the holidays is when that would be done. So we didn't want to schedule a meeting around the busiest time of the holiday season. So right after January, right after the first of the year, we plan on a public meeting. In that meeting, the public will have the opportunity to see the preliminary plans, to hear about the proposed improvements, and learn how they can provide feedback and comments to the development team. We also plan on having a pre-recorded video presentation of that information at that meeting, and then also available on our website for folks that can't make it to the meeting itself. So early January we'll have that. We'll get comments back from the public. We'll address those comments and complete our environmental document in early spring of 2023. There will be right-of-way acquisition along this corridor, and we anticipate all right-of-way to be complete and acquired by January of 2024. The project is currently on schedule for construction in August of 2024, with construction to most likely start in earnest in early spring of 2025. The intent is to build this in phase construction, keep State Road 45 open during construction. However, there may be brief closures at Pete Ellis Discovery Parkway when we build those legs of that intersection. So a lot of this information will be discussed in greater detail at our public meeting at the beginning of next year, and there'll be a lot more detail on those projects at that time. I do want to briefly talk about the provisional project we've got east of there, 2,231. When we say provisional project, NDOT has a provisional project or bench program where we develop plans to have stuff kind of shelf ready in case there's a hole in funding. If there's a gap in funding because another project moved out, these bench projects can kind of fit in and we can keep going. So for this particular project, it's planned to be ready to let in fiscal year 25, along with the other two projects. But it is contingent on funding being available to NDOT that fiscal year. So if funding is not available in 25, the project will move to 26. If funding is not available in 26, it's guaranteed to go in 27. So that project will go no later than 2027. Hopefully, knock on wood, and all the stars align, it can go in 25 with the rest of the work. Like I said, we're currently in process of evaluating and analyzing alternatives. So this one's a little bit more behind schedule than the other two. We plan on preliminary plans being complete sometime in the spring of 23. Public meeting, we'd have a separate public meeting for this project in the summer of 23. And then NEPA approval or environmental document approval in the fall of 23, right away complete mid-24, and letting in 25. So, the way NDOT determines which projects are funded, which capital projects are funded, is a very data-driven process. Our assets are scored and ranked against each other, and that funding is competed against statewide. So sometimes we have a situation like what we had here, where we had approved or provisional projects in kind of successive years. They weren't all in the same fiscal year. This one, share the board, there's a lot of unseen time and effort that our Seymour District folks kind of put in to get these projects more aligned and to be as aligned as closely as they are. So I just want to make mention of that fact. That kind of wraps everything up. I want to say if a board member has additional questions, feel free to get with me afterwards to discuss. If you want to, for any details or project-specific questions, if you really want to get into details, your best answer is going to come from utilizing our NDOT 4U call center. So you can call 1-855-463-6848, or you can go to the www.ndot4, the number 4, U, just the letter U.com, and submit a question via the website. So with that, I give my time back to the chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Wallman. I'm going to limit questions to Ms. Clements, who requested this item. Ms. Clements, while we have talked about it, do you have any brief questions for Mr. Wallman at this time?
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate your attending to this under this particular item on the agenda for items not included on the agenda. And for the next meeting, I would request that we move the item to old business on the agenda. And if possible, Mr. Wallman, I would like to see a discussion and also the diagrams of the various models you're proposing and concerning the difference between a multi-use path along that corridor versus bike lanes and sidewalks, et cetera. I'd like to see the two types of, the proposal and possible discussion of the possible constraints so that we can avoid and avert bottlenecks that might arise when we go into next year's public meetings.
Okay, Mr.
So-
Wallman, thank you, Ms.
Thank
Clements.
you.
With respect to what she said, Mr. Wallman, are the things that she requested a part of the process? I mean, were we going to see them eventually, and is she simply asking them to be moved up, or were these not things that we were going to see at all?
So, a lot of this is going to be covered in the public meeting, and that coordination happens, I would say, at that time. I'm not sure. We can certainly engage and maybe have an offline conversation on what you would, what any stakeholder would like to see. But I want to be respectful of the board's time too, because
We are
I
late,
don't want to
yeah.
go down a rabbit hole of going into details on a particular design project.
I'm just trying to establish whether this was going to be a matter of course anyway, or, I mean, I think we need to call it here. I'm going to reach out to Ms. Clements and you, Mr. Wallman, and staff to try to coordinate something before the next meeting so that we don't continue having late meetings here. But I want to thank both of you for your time. Can we have a roster of upcoming meetings from staff?
The upcoming meetings. Upcoming meetings.
Upcoming meetings.
I'm sorry. Technical Advisory Committee, September 28th, 10 o'clock in the morning. Also in this room, hybrid. Citizens Advisory Committee, September 28th in McCloskey Room, hybrid, 6:30 in the evening. And then there's a typo on the Policy Committee that's actually on Friday, October 14th, 1:30 in this room, and also hybrid.
Very good. With that, there's no other business.
Move
Take
to
a motion.
adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. We have a second? Second. Is there any objection to adjournment? If not, this meeting is adjourned.